Well, good morning, everybody. Happy to have you all along. There is nothing like having a conversation that could last 6 hours and trying to do it inside of an hour. I'll look forward to your guys' input as well as mine, just so we don't end up going way too long. Good chance some of this winds up being part of a training video, but today we're talking about second in command. Who are they? What do they do? How do you communicate with them? How do you keep them updated? And I'm going to give you a few trade secret observations to kind of go along with that. So when we talk about second in command, there are three and a half, I'm going to call it, primary people that you need to consider inside of that role. Anytime you have a will, you have an executor. And that executor is, by definition, a second in command. They only become second in command when you're gone, when you're dead. That's the way wills operate. The half is what's called a power of attorney. And the power of attorney, it's very, very important you understand because a lot of times the legal world forgets to consider that. The power of attorney is the person who has the ability to sign your name, but that ought to go with an also sign your name. Just because you have a power of attorney does not mean that you lost your authority to sign your name. Now, the legal world, oddly enough, forgets that sometimes. I've had an attorney tell a bank that they couldn't accept a check that somebody wrote because somebody else had the power of attorney. No, doesn't work that way. Power of attorney does not remove your authority. It merely adds somebody else to have the opportunity or the right, if you will, to be able to sign your name. Creates a lot of problems, and a lot of people are frustrated when custodians, like Schwab, Pershing, Merrill Lynch, whomever, want updated powers of attorney because there's also no place to really file that you revoked a power of attorney. So you'll every now and then see a limited power of attorney that says if somebody's going to be out of the country, it happens with military people all the time. You're going to be out of the country for 6 months or a year. You would do a limited power of attorney that gave people the ability to sign your name for a certain or specific period of time. Inside of a trust, this would be the third one. Inside of a trust, you're going to name the trustee. Now, the majority of the time, for most Americans, you're going to have a grantor revocable trust. Some people will call it a living trust. Some people who want to impress people will call it inter vivos, which is just Latin for living. But inside of that trust, you have a grantor, that's the person who put the money in, and you have a trustee. In almost all cases, they are both the same person. The trustee and the grantor are one and the same. Then you have a successor trustee. That is the person who has the authority, if you will, the opportunity to be able to step in when they're given that opportunity. Now, remember, there are about four ways where a successor trustee, Peter just messaged me that he's in the waiting room. There are about four ways that a successor trustee becomes the trustee. The most common way is you die, same way that an executor begins to take over. The second most common way is illegal, doesn't work, yet it appears to on paper. And that's where the kids steal the checkbook, steal the car keys, and they start acting as if they're the successor trustee, even though there's been nothing that is legally or formally made that happen. In 38 years, if you've acquired the toolkit, you've heard me talk about this. In 38 years, I have seen 7 people resign as trustee, and name their secondary trustee or their successor trustee as being in charge. Um, I've seen doctors. So there's two normal ways inside of most trusts. A doctor says that you're incapacitated, um, and gives the successor trustee authority to take control. Or a judge says you're incompetent and names the successor trustee as trustee. Again, I've never seen the latter, and doctors don't want to sign the forms because they don't want to wind up in court. For the most part, it's a process or a guardrail that is flat out never used. But those are the mechanisms that exist. So that second in command is a person who comes in, who makes decisions for you on your behalf when you're not there. Either you're dead, or you are incapacitated and incapable of making your own decisions. I like to break it down and say, okay, there's people who can't make decisions, people who shouldn't be making decisions, and people who just need a little handholding or a little bit of support. In my experience, this is the conversation that gets the least amount of respect and control, or conversation, in-depth thought of anything in an estate planning process. And this happens for a few reasons. The first one is the attorney who creates a trust. Once that trust is created, is out of the environment. They're gone. A will is different. If you ever had a will created by an attorney, the conversation goes something like this. I'm going to keep your original. I'm going to put it in my fireproof safe. I'm going to give you a copy, and you need to tell your heirs, your beneficiaries, something happens to me, to come back to my office. And that's code word, so that I can probate your estate. I remember, probate is not a tax. Probate is not anything you have to go through. Probate is a legal process to transfer assets that pays attorneys. That's it. There's no reason in the United States of America today that you should have to go through the probate process. It just shouldn't happen. It is clearly not a goal. And I have never heard anybody defend the probate process that's been through it. And I've never heard anybody say it's a good idea other than an attorney. And there's a reason for that. It's part of their business, if you will. When they do a trust, when the attorney helps you write the trust, they are pretty much done with the relationship. You take it, you leave, you walk out the door. You may make changes to it. They don't know. You may get a new trust. They don't know. It's kind of a transaction deal, if you will. There's not a lot that goes into that. And so they get to that question, who do you want to be second in command? Well, the first one is they have no real interest, no skin in the game. The second problem is most people just quickly name their kids. And we're going to talk about some of the challenges that go along with that, in at least in my opinion, in terms of where they are. And we have Dr. Peter Lichtenberg with us, and Peter's going to help with a question that he doesn't even know that's coming, but it really kind of talks about who that next in command is, and how you make sure that they don't need a little bit of support, hand holding, or helping. But back to the problem at hand. So the attorney names, ask you who you want. You think, because you've always heard, should be my child. By the way, they're going to inherit the money anyhow. They might as well be the beneficiary, and so the kids get named in that role very, very quickly, without a lot of conversation and a lot of thought that really goes into the process. The other people end up naming a bank, and that's usually where the attorney has a relationship with the bank, and they name a bank trust department. And we're going to talk about one of the challenges that came from that. Your second in command is critical. Now, in the world that I live in the state of Indiana and 30 other states in the country, 37 other states, 38 now have what's called a trust protector. So inside of Joe's Trust, you will find two second in commands. And that's what I would encourage people to be able to consider. Why do you need a second in command at all? Well, that's your guardrail. Um, that if you don't have a second in command, you have no guardrail. It's you yourself and you making the decisions about what needs to happen without being able to have any secondary support of any nature, any backup if you need it. So let's go to the first answer. What happens when you name your kids second in command? And remember, I gave you three of them, right? It could be a will. That often can be your child. Please don't get scared by this. I have done a 6-hour training program for CPAs on what trustees, successor trustees, and executors need to know what they're legally liable for. Nobody wants to live through that training. CPAs do it for continuing education, and other people do it for they just like to learn. It's amazing what they really are responsible for, and most people don't know that. But the executor oftentimes is a child and their job, because again, you really want nothing to travel through your will. Remember, if you have a will, that means probate, right? You don't want to go through that process. So your will, for most of you, will be what's called a pour over will. I have one, and it says, just in case anything I happen to forget to put in my trust, please do. That's all it does. So there's no probate process. It just tells the court just in case. And one of our families, Jim, I did his trust in 2002. Everything was done fine. When I say I did it working with an attorney, I'm not an attorney. Don't confuse that. I worked with him with the attorney. The trust was done. The trust was funded. Everything was good. And about 12, 13 years later, somewhere in 2014, 15, somebody showed up that owed him $100,000 from a debt that he'd written off. And he didn't call me. And honestly, $100,000 in his world didn't matter a lot. He had a lot more money than that. And at 80 some years old, he meandered down to the bank, opened up a CD, put $100,000 in the bank, put his name on it, not his trust. And he passed away. And the kids called and said, Joe, I assume we don't have to go through probate. And I said, you'd be correct. And then they called back and said, well, what about this $100,000? I go, what $100,000? Right? I mean, this stuff happens all of the time. So whenever you hear somebody say you don't need a will, that's incorrect. You need a pour over will, even if you have a trust to be able to go along. So back to naming the kids and part of the problem. And let's do this. What in the world does this have to do with aging with clarity? The only way that I can properly get from here to the other side, remember, I have full intention of being in charge of my trust the day that I die. There is no part of me that is waiting for somebody else to step in. None. But I want to have guardrails just in case I need a little bit of support, a little bit of help along the way. Can guardrails be annoying? Yeah, I had to wire money this morning to work on a property that we're working on. And yes, I had to talk to my banker because the guardrail is we're not going to accept just electronic communication. Is that frustrating? Yes. Does it slow it down? Yes, partially by design to make sure things are double, triple checked. Makes sense. I don't have a few $1,000s floating in the electronic universe without a conversation that's being able to go along with it. That's a guardrail. When I get on the scales in the morning and I check my body fat percentage with my little Hume device, that's a guardrail. I don't worry so much about the weight as I do the body fat part and pay attention to it. It's a guardrail. Do I like it? No, but it gives me an indication of is my nutrition and my exercise training going right? That's what guardrails are. That's what we talk about inside of trust, but they don't work without that second in command. So many times people, because they will tell the attorney, name my kids. People haven't thought about this. They don't hear about it. The extreme majority of the time, people die in charge of their trust. Remember, if we live long enough, kids steal the checkbook and the car keys, but there's no legal transfer of that control. And I would say probably 95% of the cases. of an estate that we work with or see when people come to us. People have named their kids. The kids don't understand the responsibility of what they're legally eligible for. And most of the time, like in my case, I have two daughters. Most people will name their two kids. Now, rule number one in second in command, somebody has to be in charge. You may not like it. You may not want to hear it. You may say, but Joe, I love my kids equally. You may try to pick the smart one. And this is where we're going to get into an industry secret that um, not going to make some of you happy, not going to make some of the people who see this tape happy, but it's true, right? Um, I used to tell people when I taught at Purdue, there's a double curse of knowledge. The first curse of knowledge is you don't know what you don't know. The second curse of knowledge is you don't what other people don't know. So when I'm teaching, the more I know a topic, the greater my presumption is you know it too. And so it's very easy when I'm lecturing or when I'm teaching to use lingo or use words that are just unfamiliar to people. I don't call them successor trustees. I call them second in command because that seems to resonate in our heads, right? Successor trustee is a legal term. Executor is a legal term. Second in command is who does it when I can't, right? And that's really what we're talking about today. The problem is this in the service industry. So think CPAs, attorneys, brokers. When we're not in that space, we have a presumption that they know things that they may or may not know. They may not, they may know they don't know. That's true. It happens where you'll ask an attorney a question and they'll say, hey, I've got to go research that. Or a CPA who says, I've got to go research that. Or a broker who will rarely say, I can't handle that. All right. The answer is almost always, well, of course I can do that. Right. But there are a lot of nuances in the financial world. There's a lot of nuances in the tax world. There's a lot of, Lord knows, a lot of stuff inside of the legal world. So interestingly enough, people in the medical world finally figured this out. You would not go to a cardiologist and have them set a bone, right? They may have a better understanding of how to set a broken bone than we do, but that doesn't mean a cardiologist sets bones. They work on that blood flow of your system, right? In the legal world, somebody just says, I'm an attorney, or I'm a CPA, or I'm a wealth advisor, whatever words they use. And we presume that they understand what is going on. So first we name our kids. And here's what I hear all the time. My sister is a CPA and is senior executive vice president of a company in Seattle, and I live in Indianapolis. So I should name my sister as my trustee because, Joe, you've told me a beneficiary should never be a trustee. That's correct. Beneficiary should never be a trustee, right? And you say, well, I know my sister. She's clearly with it. She's got these titles. She understands what's going on. It sounds very, very, very reasonable. But remember when you're naming a second in command, they've got to understand what's expected. You have to have a process to be able to communicate with them, a process to update them, and they've got to truly want the job because it is a job. I mean, you do have some responsibilities to be there. Being a successor trustee is one of those things where not everybody, but a lot of people may want the title, but nobody wants the responsibility. Not when they really understand what it is. I've said in one of my recent articles, one of the biggest burdens that I think parents give to their kids is to name them in charge of their trust. And I won't tell you that sometimes kids don't think they should be named. They just don't understand what that really means. Right. So when we go to a CPA, and keep in mind, I work with maybe 15 different CPA firms. I know 50 different CPAs well. If we were having a conversation about tax planning, you would presume that that would be the CPA who was doing the planning and I would be doing the listening. but you would be wrong. I live in the tax planning space. They live in the tax reporting space. Are they capable of learning tax planning? Absolutely. But it's not their focus every day. But we presume just because they're CPA that they would know this stuff. We presume just because somebody's an attorney and legally capable of creating a document that they understand how to do that and that they're experienced with it. And that's one of those problems, that curse of knowledge that we have. We think other people know things based on titles that sometimes they really don't know. So just be careful with that. So I've already gave you one reason not to name a kid. It is a burden. It is a job. Two, I don't believe a beneficiary should ever be second in command of a document. Now you remember you have three. All right, three and a half. I called it right. So power of attorney is the half because it's not really as in charge as you think it is. The executor of your will. I will buy that that can be a child if you've got a pour over will. So you've got your kids taking care of your personal effects like your undies. That makes sense to me as opposed to somebody else. You've got the successor trustee, your second in command, as I like to call them. And then the fourth is your healthcare directive, right? And here's where you really have to be careful. I have two daughters, one's an RN, one's not. One would pull the plug if the doctor said Joe's not going to make it, and the other would keep me alive until the last penny was gone, right? My wishes and wills, wants, and desires as the human are probably somewhere in between, right? Let's not pull the plug too soon, but for goodness sakes, let's not leave me plugged in on a machine and let me deteriorate for a year and a half either, while everything that I built is eroded while we're trying to keep a vegetable alive. My wishes would be somewhere in between. So you have to be careful who that healthcare directive is. That probably needs to be a person inside of your life, as opposed to a professional that's nowhere near you or outside. Just my opinion. Remember, I'm not an attorney. This is just what I've seen from 38 years of experience. So you should name a beneficiary as a trustee ever. Here's a few reasons, a few things that I've seen go wrong. People name two kids. Just understand whenever you have an even number, the only divider is court, right? You either have one child who can bully the other child, one who talks louder than the other. Eventually, somebody capitulates, just a big fancy word for saying they surrender, right? I've seen that happen a lot. I've watched I've watched people go through the legacy planning process, have all the I's dotted, all the T's crossed, all their intentions documented. And I've watched two kids in my office look at one another and say, if we just decide to end the trust today, Joe, who would know? And that's the problem, right? I mean, really, and I watched them do it. You know, they're co-trustees. They told me to distribute the funds. All I am was the wealth advisor at that point in time, and all the work that their parents put in to make sure that that their future generations would have been taken care of was out the window. And I've had people say, well, they can't do that. Well, no, they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't do that, but they most certainly can do that. And they did do that. Beneficiaries shouldn't be trustees. You should never have more than an odd, it should only be an odd number. And I believe that trustee should be a professional, legally liable professional acting as a fiduciary. So I built a trust company, by the way. So I kind of have a slightly biased opinion on this. I built a trust company to do this. People who legally manage money, who understand what's going on, who take care of the financial decisions based on your document. Now, here's why I have a second in command. There are times when your document's not clear. If you don't have clarity, no different than us aging with clarity, if you don't have clarity, you wind up in court, right? Somebody has to make a decision, and I don't want anything to go to court. So my second in command, the human, is somebody who knows me, has my understanding of how life is not a beneficiary by any stretch of the imagination inside of my trust. Next rule, they can't be bullied by my children, right? My trust protector is Adam. He's one of my partners. Believe me, he's not going to be bullied by anybody, including me, let alone my kids, let alone my son-in-law, let alone anybody else that would come in and say, well, Joe would have meant this. No, no. And he doesn't have to worry about Thanksgiving being interrupted. He's not going to be at Thanksgiving, right? So now my kids are there. They're able to do what it is that they want to do. Adam's able to interpret what my trust says instead of a court trying to interpret it. Now, I have a lot of respect for the legal system. Don't misunderstand. I do. Um, but a guy with a black robe and a gavel that happened to get elected um, can legally interpret what's in my document. I would much rather have somebody who knew me, who knew my intentions, who has letters of intentions that I've written them, who's had conversations with me, be able to interpret what it is that I intended. So when you have a question or conversation comes up and somebody needs an extra distribution of money or somebody needs something changed, um, I want that mechanism to be inside of my trust so that it's done via that second in command. And that's why that part really exists. It's why it's there. Adam is capable of doing that. So here's the Dr. Lichtenberg part. And what we do know is that people tend to travel in circles. Right. So sometimes I'll bring this up and people go, Joe, I don't know who my second in command should be. I get that. And I've got a list of here's people you can consider and talk to. Remember the rules. They have to know that they've been named. They have to understand their responsibilities. They have to have the capability to do the job. That doesn't mean that they're financial wizards. The capability means that they have to understand what your intent was. All right. And then last, they have to be updated because you get to this problem where we tend to name people who are us. And Peter may very well tell me, well, Joe, the person that I would name is my age. What if they lose it? And that's a great question that we're going to ask Peter in a second. But people tend to travel in these circles where you've got people who are of similar age, similar beliefs, beliefs being good. Age, as we age, could be a problem, right? You want to make sure your second in command is still as competent as you are and still capable of doing what it is that they're doing. So when I put these trusts together, when we have used the legacy lock solution, I understand what I'm looking for in second in command in terms of that named. But Dr. Lichtenberg, thanks for being here. You heard the story, right? So
I
you
heard it. Yeah.
you name your brother as your second in command. Um, how do you keep track of your brother as you age to make sure that he's still with it?
I think it just goes to show that no matter what your plans are, you have to review them periodically. And if you are going to choose somebody your age, you're going to have a high risk that at one point they may not be able to carry out your wishes. So it's a good idea to think of somebody a good 10, 15 years younger.
If you can figure out how to target, if you can figure out who that person is,
Hmm.
that makes all the sense in the world. So, um, what I help people with when they design their second in command is the closer somebody is to you, the more power that they have. The further away they are from you, and I don't mean on a map, the further the way they are away from you, the less control that they have. Right. So my second in command is 45 years old, right? I'm 59, but he's been a partner of mine for 20 years. I know him well. This works well. Something happens to him. There's a second in command, successor, if you will. I've known him for 10 years. He's also a CFP, good to go. Those two have a lot of authority to act on my behalf if I need support, hand holding, or if I'm gone. They're here to take care of Barb, no different than they are today. those two eventually, some point in time, if I'm still here at 95, they're likely to be retired. And if that's the case, and they don't want the role and responsibility anymore, or they're 75 or 80 years old themselves, the next person that they name does not have near the authority that they do, because that person, whoever it happens to be, isn't going to know my intentions near as well as they did. Now, the world of AI and everything may change part of this. You just need to know that is, I talk into an AI bot almost every day about here's how I feel about this, here's how I think about that. And, they have all of these. They're going to be able to extract what Joe believed to be true for years and years and years to come. Whether you want to take the time to watch it or not, it's going to be there. So some of that may be solved in that scenario. But you can have decreasing powers, what I call regressive powers built into documents, if you will. But that second in command is a conversation that should just not be held lightly. And I gave you a few of the rules. It should never be a beneficiary, right? I've seen, and I don't think it should be somebody just because they have a title without understanding that they really want the job. So I watched a CPA that I love dearly, respected, and you know what he did for the last hour of his working day on his last day? He resigned from 17 trusts that he was the successor trustee of. He resigned from 17 trusts, right? Sent letters. By the way, dear John letter, by the way, I will no longer serve in this capacity. I have retired. Now, he felt that he was doing that because he'd reached an age where he felt, hey, I could have cognitive issues, not aware of them. I understand aging with clarity. I understand the things that are going on. That was the excuse that he used. Whether it was real or not, I don't know. But some people take on the job, quote unquote, professionally, as opposed to from an emotional side. I get it. I understand it, but you need to be aware of it, right? So inside of that process, again, you need to figure out who it is you want to name and the rules, right? They shouldn't be a beneficiary. There shouldn't be multiple. You have to understand what responsibilities they have. I have a fiduciary responsible legally, can be sued, shot, just to be honest, and to take care of the money and the financial decisions based on the document. And I have a human, one of my partners, that has the ability to interpret the document in case any court wants to define what is, right? I don't want that in my future and in my life. Whoever the second in command is can't be bullied by my children, right? So this is important because it's usually not the children. We did have a case last year where somebody named two kids as the successor trustees. I mean, I love this expression, but just think about it. What could possibly go wrong, right? They named two kids as successor trustees. That's violation number one. You can't have two. You need one. And the two haven't spoken to each other for 7 years, right? They don't go to Christmas. They don't go to Thanksgiving. They don't like each other primarily over spouses, but that's beside the point. They don't talk. And suddenly they're in charge of a family's legacy, if you will. This is just not a good plan. And obviously, you wouldn't want one in charge of the other because then again, bad things can happen. I can't articulate enough that people do flat out just throw up the white flag, surrender, and in trust with all of the work and everything that you put into it to make sure that their futures were protected, that your legacy was protected. And some people say, Joe, I don't care. If I'm dead, I'm dead. Well, I care while I'm alive for certain. And I don't want what I did and created harming my children later on. I do not want to create a burden. And believe it or not, leaving people large chunks of money at one time who aren't prepared for it is a burden. You may look at it at your age and say, you know what, if somebody handed me $1 million, it is not going to be a burden at all. I would call that a blessing. And go to Legacies Lost inside of the classroom. You will find that has created problems. I gave Toddy a few stories this morning to be able to use for the workshop. Um, it's amazing how people behave over money, and you've got to do everything you can to eliminate that kind of family chaos that you possibly can. And one would think naming your kid as the successor trustee or the second in command would eliminate some of that burden. And all I see it do is actually amplify that burden. Oh, as Mark Twain said, if two things that Twain said that I think are important, relevant to this conversation. It's not what you know that'll get you into trouble. It's what you know that just ain't so. That'll get you in trouble. I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions on who a second in command should be, how a legacy plan should be done. And I think a lot of times we just follow suit because that's what our neighbor did. That's what we heard at church. That's what other people have done. And we live at different times in a different world with different opportunities. You know that with everything else in life. Don't get caught in the 1950s estate planning thought process when we're in the 2020s, and there's things to consider that are a little bit different. The second thing Twain said is if I could have made it shorter, I would have. I could literally talk about this topic for easily a day. The examples, the challenges. The one last year, I had $700,000 or $800,000 in account. For those of you who don't know, my profession is managing money. So we're responsible for a little over $1 billion, more than 1,400 families, 31 states, 42 people that are on our team. Um, Guy needed estate planning. I sent him to an attorney. The attorney named a bank as the trust department, at the trust department at the local bank. One of the reasons I created a trust department. He named the bank, didn't tell the bank. Right? Remember the process. You got to create it. You got to know who to name. You got to make sure they want the job. They're in the business. One would think they would want the job. You have to keep them updated, right? This case, that didn't matter. He died 6 weeks after the trust was done. But they have to be aware, right? And so the attorney creates a trust, doesn't tell the bank. The guy didn't know that he was supposed to tell the bank, creates a trust. And there were some questions, some lack of clarity, if you will, over who gets the income. The guy got brain cancer and passed away literally 6 weeks later. So the funeral home calls and says, Joe, can we bury this guy? Is the money good? Right. And I go, yeah, I got $700,000 in account. Money's good. You're fine. Yeah. Took the bank 7 months to accept the responsibility because there was confusion inside of the document and there was no trust protector. So both of the things that I've taught you inside of the Legacy Lock solution would have prevented that from happening in either case. And you just have to imagine how the daughter felt at the funeral home trying to pick out a casket and somebody telling them whether they could or could not afford to be able to buy it because dad's money was locked up, not because he did anything wrong, but because the bank didn't want to accept the responsibility. Happens all the time. Oh, I will try to leave it short. Doc, what would you like to add to this? You always have
No,
great insight.
no, it's been great, Joe. I think the thing that everybody has to remember is it's about trust and not your favorite person. It's about who you could trust and what trustworthy qualities have they displayed throughout their life that make you confident they will carry out your wishes.
When it comes to your intent, I totally agree with that. I think somebody told me once upon a time that when you think about a car and two seats in the car, that trust and competency are not necessarily in the same seat, right? You got to have somebody you trust, but if they don't know how to make the decisions or what decisions to make, you can certainly create some challenges and some problems too.
Sure.
Yeah, you want somebody you can rely on, and rely is probably a combination of trust and competency. So Well, folks, that is, like I said, I can talk about this for hours. What's been happening is people have been watching this later and sending me direct messages to ask questions. I don't think when you have a map spread across the country like we do that you can find a time that is convenient for everyone. So we'll keep doing it this way for a little bit longer and see what happens. And if there are any questions out there, just holler at me. And if not, send a direct message and we'll go from there. But appreciate all of your time. Have a great day.
You too.
Take care, guys.